Hello, my name is Alan Curran, and as we approach the end of the decade of Centenaries, we're going to take you on a historical trail of Celbridge, County Kildare. We start here at the Workhouse. At the beginning of this period, it was used to hold Belgian refugees displaced by the beginning of the First World War. Among them were a young couple, Irma and Gustav from Ghent, who had initially posed as brother and sister to avoid separation. Eventually, they would admit their relationship and be married here at St. Patrick's Church in Celbridge. The Board of Guardians here at the Workhouse would grant them a one-day honeymoon, which they spent in a hotel in Dublin. Follow me now as we make our way towards the main street of the village, and we continue the rest of the trail. Over 290 men from Celbridge served during the First World War. Among them was Major Edward Connolly of the Royal Field Artillery, who lived here at Castletown House. Sadly for Connolly, his young groomsman, Frederick Megan, did not survive the war, and he died from wounds suffered in battle in 1915. He is one of at least 29 men to be killed during the First World War, just one of the connections Celbridge has to the decade of commemorations. There are two memorials to those men, one here at Christ Church at the gates of Castletown House, and another at Celbridge College. Now here in the cemetery of Christ Church at the gates of Castletown House, we find an unusual grave. This is the resting place of Baron Alexis Wrangel. He was married to Diana Connolly Carew, who spent much of her life here at Castletown House, and was buried here in 2005. He has a strange connection to the Russian Civil War, as his father, General Peter Wrangel, was the final commander-in-chief of the Right Russian Army. That civil war lasted between 1917 and 1923, and ended just over 100 years ago. Here at Castletown Gates, we find ourselves at the top of Celbridge Main Street. The next section of the video will bring you right down the main street. We'll discuss some of the history of the buildings you may well walk past every day. Now, outside St. Patrick's Catholic Church here in Celbridge is this imposing memorial. It was erected in 1904 to commemorate Sir Gerald Dease of Celbridge Abbey. He had worked most of his life on behalf of the poor of Ireland and campaigned for a university for Catholic students, and the people of Celbridge had this memorial erected following his death in 1903. His two sons are important as well. Arthur Dease served during the First World War as a member of the Red Cross, earning the Croix de Guerre for service in France, while his other son, William Dease, served in the Remount service. He cared for horses, and 87 men from Celbridge would follow him into that service. An unsurprising turn of events for men from Kildare. The monument itself has been recently restored with the help of Kildare County Council and the parish by local business Bracken Monuments. New letters were installed, weatherproofing applied, and the monument cleaned. The inscription on the monument reads, "Erected by his numerous friends of all classes and all creeds to the memory of Sir Gerald Dease, KCVO. Born 17th of July 1831 and died 18th of October 1903. A man of stainless honour who used his high position and great abilities with unselfish zeal to improve the condition of the poor and advance the welfare of his country. A good life hath its number of days, but a good name shall live forever. May he rest in peace." We're now outside the centre in the centre of Celbridge village. We are at a plaque that many people would walk past every day, commemorating Irish volunteer Edward Bridgeman. He served as a member of C Company during the Easter Rebellion, fighting at the Four Courts. Afterwards, he was interned at Staffordshire Prison over in England, and after his release, would settle here in Celbridge in 1917. He established a shoe business in what is now the Centre building, and it was originally known as Bridgeman's. Many former residents of Celbridge may recognise it, as it did not change until the 1980s. Now, everyone here in Celbridge recognises this, the main bridge over the Liffey into the village. In the 1920s, just as today, it was the main route in and out of the town and was targeted for destruction by the IRA. On the 8th of January 1921, it suffered significant damage after a bomb was detonated, causing serious disruption to those living in the town, cutting off access to neighbouring villages like Ardclough and the main road into Dublin City, which runs behind me. Michael Salmon was born in 1893 in Clane. In 1918, as a member of the Irish Volunteers, he was interned at Mountjoy Jail in Dublin. He was well known for his sporting ability. In 1919, he won an All-Ireland with Kildare football team. In 1921, he became a referee and was the referee on the 21st of November during a match between Dublin and Tipperary. This match became notoriously known as Bloody Sunday, and Michael himself managed to survive. After the war in 1922, he would settle here in Celbridge. What was once the Railway Inn was bought by Salmon, and he would live here for the rest of his life. It's now known as McNamee's Abbey Lodge. The original barracks for the Royal Irish Constabulary, the RIC here in Celbridge, was opened at what is now Michelangelo's restaurant in 1841. After 1911, the RIC moved to the old Millkeeper's House, now Choi's Restaurant, and by the War of Independence, it seems the complex was used as a headquarters, as RIC barracks in Maynooth, Leixlip and Kilcock were closed, making this the only barracks for the north of Kildare. In August of 1920, an attack on Celbridge by IRA forces saw RIC property destroyed by fire, and they also attacked the courthouse, which is now the NCBI charity shop. Behind me is the Abbey National School, opened in 1819. There were 2 classrooms, one for boys and one for girls, and separate yards outside as well. The school operated right throughout Celbridge's history, and in 1918 we see the arrival of the Spanish flu. One of the school children here, Michael Dillon, contracted the disease and sadly passed away from the infection at the age of just 12 years old. It's believed that his family may have contracted the disease from soldiers using the railway line nearby as they were travelling back from the front to barracks around Celbridge. Other notable students include Anthony Riley, who would be executed in 1923 during the Irish Civil War, and the school itself continues operating today under the name Scull na Monastruck in a new building on the other side of the town. Hubert Michael O'Connor was born in 1887 on a house on this site known as the Grove, from which the modern estate gets its name. As a member of the Irish Volunteers, he was involved in gun running in County Wicklow and later joined the British Army as a member of the King's Light Shropshire. As a captain in 6th Battalion, he led a raid on enemy trenches during the Battle of the Somme in July of 1916. Once the raid was complete, he returned to no man's land to rescue injured soldiers, an action that earned him the Military Cross for bravery. Sadly, around 1 year later, during the Battle of Passchendaele, Michael Hubert O'Connor would be killed in action. He remains buried to this day in a military cemetery in Belgium. Now, one stop to make on your heritage trail of Celbridge during the decade of commemoration is here at Tullane Graveyard. On the wall here we have a plaque commemorating Michael Heffernan, a member of the Irish Volunteers who fought during the 1916 Easter Rising. He would go on to be involved during the War for Independence as a member of the IRA, notably during the escape of Frank Teeling, Ernie O'Malley and Simon Donnelly from Kilmainham Jail, where Heffernan was living not too far away. He eventually would end up working with the railways quite frequently, and he would even serve in the Irish Defence Forces during the emergency period, or the Second World War. He eventually died in 1954 and was buried here at Tullane in a family plot, the site of which has been unfortunately lost. But he is remembered today as part of the Celbridge history that we have by this plaque on the chapel wall. Born on Main Street here in Celbridge, this is the grave of C.J. Sheridan. By 1914, his family had moved to Drumcondra, and he and his brothers joined the British military during the First World War. Sheridan served in the Royal Flying Corps, later the Royal Air Force. With the end of hostilities in Europe, he returned as an experimental mechanic over in England. Unfortunately, an experiment on a long-range bomber saw Sheridan killed in an accident, and as the First World War did not end until August of 1921 officially, the grave here is one of the most remarkable at Tullane, as it is included on the Commonwealth War Graves. We find ourselves here at Donaghcumper Cemetery as part of our heritage trail to talk about some of the men that were buried here. We start with Anthony O'Reilly, who was a member of the Irish Free State Army during the Irish Civil War. Stationed at Baldonnel, along with others, he would eventually join the anti-treaty side. They are involved in actions at Pike Bridge between Maynooth and Leixlip. After being captured, he was court-martialed at Kilmainham Jail in Dublin and sentenced to execution. That took place on the 8th of January 1923, and he was initially buried at Keogh Barracks, now Richmond Barracks Centre. Eventually in 1924, men executed like O'Reilly were exhumed on the orders of the Free State government, and many of them were reburied in cemeteries like this, given a proper funeral. Beside me is the grave of Peter McBride, a veteran of the Great War. He was a member of the Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers and served on the Western Front during the conflict. He would ultimately lose his arm to shrapnel during the war, and he would eventually be returned to Ireland before Christmas of 1918. Originally from Omagh, he would settle here in Celbridge on a house on the Hatch Road. There he would give his account of wartime service to the Celbridge Charter. If you're interested in learning more, a version of that account can be seen in the description box below. Behind me here is the family plot of the Kirkpatrick family from Donaghcumper House. Beside me is that of Ivan Kilpatrick, born in 1897. Educated in England, he would join the British Army in 1914, and he would serve in the Gallipoli campaign. In August of 1915, he was injured and returned home. Despite being accepted to college in Oxford, he would decide to return to the war. He took up a position at the General Headquarters in Intelligence and would end the war leading Belgian resistance movements in German-occupied territory. After the war, he would continue working as part of the government in the diplomatic service. And it was during this time, stationed in Rome, he saw the rise of fascism and even met figures like Benito Mussolini. During the Second World War, Kirkpatrick was called on for his experience beforehand to formally interview and identify Rudolf Hess, who he had met in the 1930s. Continuing his work until after the war, he would eventually retire here in Celbridge, where he passed away at Donaghcumper House in 1964 after writing his memoirs. So we end our trail of Celbridge right back where we started, outside the old workhouse. By the end of this decade, the workhouse was being used by the newly founded National Army of the Irish Free State, and it was from here the first soldiers of that army would be taken to Dublin for the handover of Beggars Bush Barracks. Now that's only a small piece of the history of Celbridge, and we encourage you to get out and see it yourselves. We hope you've enjoyed the series, and we'll see you in the next one.